Sophie, hi.
Hello, nice to see you.
Lovely to see you too. I'm really delighted to have you on to chat and just record the chat and share it with some people. Um, I have been, I think it was last year I first saw your kind of the way you structure your year with work, and then it came through. Obviously, it came through again at the end of this year, towards the end of this year, and I was like, oh, do you know, I really need to chat to you about this because although it's with your work, this kind of which obviously you're going to explain a bit later in a bit, but this kind of stand against society and the way our culture behaves is so linked to, I think, how a lot of people can learn how to live in a way that is supportive to them with their chronic illness. And so if you could give kind of a brief introduction of how you work and how you structure your year and why, etc., and just talk through that, that would be great.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this chat. I feel like 45 minutes is not going to be enough and we're going to be able to talk for hours and hours because I think we have a lot in common in our kind of outlook. So yeah, thank you very much for having me. And yeah, I guess I'll start with, so I've been a personal branding photographer for five years now, like as in doing it full time. And I shot weddings before that as well, part time while working in marketing, not for very long, only like a year or so after graduating from uni, where I did French and Spanish, which is totally unrelated. And yeah, this year, so just to kind of give some context around what you're referring to, like this year is the first year where I've kind of done like a real 6 months on, 6 months off kind of split with my branding photography work, because a couple of years ago I started doing business mentoring. And through doing that, I kind of realized that really what I was doing with people was more coaching than mentoring. And I really felt like I wanted to get some professional training around that. So in, I think it was November last year, I started a professional coach training course. And I'm now doing my second one. I'm like trying to learn all the things. And so, yeah, I knew that I wanted to really focus on the coaching and mentoring work in the winter months. And so, yeah, this is the first year where I've got this real split. So it actually ended up running over a little bit because of COVID, like postponements and everything, like the things were a little bit out of my control towards the end of the summer. So it ran a little bit more into autumn than I would have ideally liked. But yeah, essentially I spend my summer months, kind of April to September, doing branding photography shoots, and I work all over the country, so there's quite a lot of travel involved with that, and I love to work outside, so we often will shoot in indoor venues and people's homes and things like that for their website photos, but I really love to work outside, so as much as possible, if it's obviously appropriate for the person, we'll go to a park or a beach or somewhere outdoors.
Lovely.
Which obviously in England that can be a little tricky in the winter months, and so it just kind of struck me that that would actually suit really well if I could have kind of the winter months for really kind of going inwards and doing the working from home virtual coaching work, and it really suits me. Like I'm so pleased that I've discovered that this is possible to do, because I think something I was kind of thinking about with the way that I've approached this is to really think about it in that like seasonal mindset. So how like summer is such a kind of outward time, like it's very energetic and creative and sort of productive in a way, and you're kind of like giving and being on and moving around and just like being very like high energy. And then winter, like literally leaves are falling from the trees, like everything is kind of like decaying in a way, like going inwards, hibernating. And I would say, like in the way that summer is kind of productive, I would think of winter as being kind of generative, because although you're going in and you're resting and you're kind of withdrawing from the world, which is totally how I see it for myself, that in itself reaps rewards later, and so that's how I kind of see it. And I think that's helpful to kind of think it's almost like I'm taking permission from like nature to do this, because like we're not made to be on all the time. Like that's what I really noticed with myself, especially as an introvert as well. I cannot physically sustain 12 months of being on out there in everyone's world, doing all things, driving around, and also with the photography. As you might know, like if you've had photo shoots for your work, like it's quite a nerve-wracking thing, right? And if people haven't had it before, they really need putting at ease, and they need kind of a lot of support around feeling comfortable in front of the camera. And so what I do is I like give everything I have. I'm like pouring my soul into making sure they feel good and they have a good, like, joyful experience. And so not only with all the driving and all of that and the editing and everything that goes with it, but the actual day itself, I do come home feeling kind of like empty. And so I just don't think that's sustainable for me personally. 12 months a year acting, operating like that. I feel like that would give me like quite a short shelf life. Like in a few years, like I might not have anything left to give. And I don't want that. Like I want a long career where I can sustain it. And for me, like having a bit of a balance and that shift in energy around the winter time is what gives me that. So yeah, it's really cool. I'm really glad I've done it. And it's taken me probably 3 years to get to this point. So the first time I did it was it? Oh no, is that 3 years? Years are so weird right now, aren't they? I was thinking it was winter 2019. Right now, yeah, it's really hard to think, isn't it? What happened? Yeah, I think winter 2019 was the first time. I think I might have taken December and January kind of off, but to do the mentoring work. And then last year was obviously very weird, but I had a bit of a longer window anyway. And then this year I've had like the biggest kind of gap in the photography work, which is really cool. And I'm like, I just love it so much. Like I wake up and I'm like, oh my gosh, I get to like walk the dog, come home, like have a cup of tea, stay at home, like chat with my clients on Zoom. And it's like, I really appreciate it. It's not just like, oh, I'm just doing it for the sake of it. Like I really cherish like every moment of each side. So I think I've made the right choice for me.
So much of what you've just said, my brain's been going ping, 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 because this whole very outward giving, and in a sense, I don't know if I'm assuming here, but being an empath and perhaps taking on some of your clients' nerves and worry, but then also having to be in that position, or being in that position of putting them at ease, and that energy kind of exchange is very outward. And then relating that to the summer and the seasons, and then the winter coaching can be, yes, there is a lot of outward energy, but there's also a lot of receiving energy. I think it's quite a great energy exchange. And it's that kind of nourishing the soil, and that you were talking about with the seasons. And I can relate to that as a businesswoman, but also as a person with a chronic illness, because chronic illness and empathy are quite connected, and not knowing when to stop and not knowing when to switch off and retreat can be something that is very triggering for symptoms and flares, etc. And I'm really interested to know, was it you taking the coaching qualification that kind of kick-started this pattern, or was there something else apart, as you did actually mention, of course, sustainability? Were they the kind of two main things?
Yeah, I think so. It kind of worked out quite well, because the course it had quite a long waiting list, and then the next one that was available when I was looking in the summer started in November. So it kind of gave me almost like an incentive, because it made me think, because it's very easy with things like this, because of what we'll get on to talk about with the conditioning and what's expected of us. It would have been so easy for me to say, oh, I'd love to take winter off. I mean, I'm saying off as if I'm not working. I'm like very much working with clients, coaching, mentoring, but it feels like off because of what we've talked about. It's a different energy. Off the photography work. I could have said, oh, that's a great idea, but then I could have just easily kept on accepting bookings, and because I had inquiries coming in, and I've now got a bit of a waiting list for next year, which is great. But
fantastic.
I could have easily just let the self-doubt take over and be like, oh no, next year, you could do it next year. And it's like, and to be honest, that's what made me sign up for the course as well last year, was that I was having that thought in my head, because I'd kind of always wanted to be a coach, if I'm being very honest with myself, which I hadn't really been up until that point. And everything was kicking off. I think it was July, I was on the website for this course, and everything was just like chaos. And I was thinking, like, there's potentially no end to this. Like, I don't know, none of us know what's going to happen. I'm saying one day I'll do it. Like, what if I just never get around to it? Like, why don't I just do it now? And so I kind of went for it. But yeah, it was good, because it made me have a bit of a deadline. It was like, I want to really commit. Like, it's a really expensive course and there's a lot of like time, given to it. So I was like, I'm not gonna like sort of do it by halves. Like, I want to go all in, and therefore I need to be dedicated and not be driving around the country and shooting and using my energy in other ways. I want to really go in on it. So that was good. It helped me to have something to aim for. And that worked really well. But yeah, that wasn't necessarily the reason. I think the reason was just, it's also there's another element to this, which in terms of the photography work, like I kind of touched on it before about the weather, I was finding, especially since COVID, I don't know whether, well, I'm sure it's related to that. I found myself getting like really, really anxious about the weather, like to a point that it was like making me feel really bad, like having physical symptoms. And I just thought, I can't do this all year, like it's too much. And I think I take on a lot of responsibility as well, because obviously I'm not in charge of the weather, like I'd love to be, but the reality is like none of us can, you know, control whether it's going to rain on someone's photo shoot. But I feel the weight of responsibility on that, and I want everyone to have a great experience, and I don't want anyone's shoot to be rained off, because it's really stressful. But I was finding that was a lot to hold. And and also I feel like last summer the weather was quite rubbish as well, so it was like a few times I was, you know, having to deal with moving things around. And because I've got quite an all-encompassing package. I help people find venues, and I also hire a hair and makeup artist, so there's a few moving parts to change if if the weather's bad. So yeah, because of the person that I am, I sort of feel the weight of all of that. And yeah, I was finding it was making me very anxious. So I think that was another reason, like this has all been part of a big lesson that I'm learning the last couple of years, of like really listening to my body and being like, this is not something to just sweep under the rug and ignore. Like if your body is feeling this way, you need to pay attention to that and do something about it. So it was partly that as well, just thinking about what is the kindest way that I can treat myself in this business. That's going to mean that I can do it for as long as I want to do it, rather than trying to push myself to the absolute limit now and then possibly pay the price later. So that was a factor as well.
So much of what you've said just now is, and it's something that everybody I'm speaking to for this podcast, the season of this podcast, is about using something which society could tell you is a nuisance or a problem, or, you know, about yourself, and, you know, therefore to push through and ignore those things so you can walk in line, basically. And yet all of the wonderful women and, you know, I'm getting to speak to for this actually say, do you know what, no, I'm going to use that actually as my superpower, or as my guide. And that's something I talk a lot about with chronic illness, to figure out actually what do I need here, and how can I do that in a very self-led over society-led way. And I get so like happy when I hear about the things people are doing as a result of that, and you know, your work structure, and, you know, noticing that anxiety, but also things outside of your control. And I often talk about kind of having certain things that can bring you out of a cycle of struggle, which can often be created by society or by you know, ideas of how a human should live, and they're almost like ropes that you can grab onto, and the more you grab onto it, and they're all like balloons, say, for instance, and they can you know, eventually like help you pull you out of that cycle. And you've talked about a few there. I just find it so interesting how kind of no matter the subject, there seem to be common themes.
Yeah, there's lots of overlaps. Yeah, I love that image. I think that's such a good point. I feel like you're kind of pointing at something that I was going to bring up around like having models of possibility, like, because I think there's, like I kind of hinted at before with the last year, like I could have very easily just carried on as I was, knowing deep down that it was going to, you know, cost me later. But I had to make the decision to back myself and be like, just because, like, even if you don't know how it's going to pan out, because I didn't, like I said, I was putting a lot of investment into the course, not knowing what was going to come back from it. Because obviously we can never know the outcome of things. We just have to try. And so, yeah, I could have easily done that. And I could have looked for all the examples of everyone else who's doing that. Because I think that's been one of the biggest things that I've had to kind of almost like face up to, or like overcome, I suppose, is thinking that, you know, you just have to work all year round at the same, like, it's just how people do it, right? Like if I think of other photographers, like, well, they don't, it's almost like you can tell it's like a an inner critic kind of voice coming in, because it's not my voice. Like
Right.
it would say like, you know, when no one else needs to like have winter off work that's shooting, like why should you? Like they can just deal with it. And when you hear that voice, you know, it's like, that's not the real me. Like that's my absorbed, you know,
Yes.
voices that I've heard from outside of me. That I'm turning against myself and using that as a reason to not try. And so what I had to do is actively seek out examples of people who were doing it differently, for whatever reason. And I think that's a really important thing to do for anyone who wants to try and do things a bit differently and kind of go against the grain. It's tough when you think it's only you, but knowing that there's actually loads of us doing things differently is so heartening. And you can kind of see like, oh, well, if they can do it, like maybe it's possible for me to do it, even not to the same level. You know, I'm thinking of people. So someone that I really look up to is Jen Carrington. I don't know if you know her. She's a coach for creatives.
Right. Yeah.
And she's a really good example of someone who has structured her work life in a way that's really completely works for her and is very different to the usual, like, you know, setup. Like it's not a 9-to-5 thing. And yeah, she takes a lot of time off in the year and things like that. And I'm personally like way, if we were to look at like the extremes of that, I'm nowhere near doing it to the level that she is, but it shows me that it's possible, like, and I can eke my way up, you know, the ladder in a way, and eventually get to that level if I want to. But yeah, it's just nice to know that like you don't have to do things exactly the same way that everybody else does. And also think, even as I say that, it makes me think, we don't even know the full story of what everyone else is doing. Like we can think we know, like that, you know, like I said, every photographer works all year. I don't actually know that. That's not a fact. Like I don't know every photographer, so how could I possibly know how they work? But because that belief would support me not going for what I want, it's quite easy to believe, which is why you have to like take a little moment with yourself and be like, actually, there could be other things happening here, and what would be a more helpful thing for me to believe in this situation?
Yeah, I recently actually wrote a blog post about, and I felt it was this huge confession about how I work and how I choose to work kind of 4 hours a day, and how I'm building my business to support being able to do that. And yet it's something that I've wanted to talk about, and yet I felt so much shame over it, because I thought, going back to what you were saying about not actually knowing how people work, even if it seems perhaps they're working 9-to-5, whatever, not actually knowing, I thought, first of all, again, who am I to choose to do that, but actually after I'd written this blog post, I came to this conclusion that if I don't share this, then other people might not do something that really would support and serve them because of the shame. And there is so much shame surrounding it. Embarrassment. But always kind of being able to connect to that deep sense of self and actually faith in oneself and belief. Have you always had a strong sense of self and self-belief, or is that something that you work on?
Oh, definitely the latter. First of all, well done for writing that blog post. That's exactly what I mean about like proof that it's possible. Like having, like you said, having examples is the only way that we're going to remove the shame and the stigma and help people feel like, actually, that's maybe something I could try. And like I said, you don't have to go to the same level of someone else that you see doing it, but you could do 10% of what they're doing and, figure out if it's right for you. So yeah, that's amazing that you shared that. And yeah, to your question about self-belief, no, I 100% have had to work on it, and I'm still working on it. And I actually would argue that for most of us, it's a lifelong endeavor. Like I don't ever, never say never, but I can imagine for most of my life, even if I become very confident and self-assured in some areas, there's always going to be a new challenge, isn't there? There's always going to be something else that we've never experienced that's probably going to bring up a lot of self-doubt for us. So I don't think it's very fair on ourselves to kind of aim for, I have this, I've mentioned this before, I take a bit of issue with the phrase unshakable confidence, which I think is like thrown around a lot.
Okay.
And I think like it's going to be shakeable. Like there's going to be things that shake us, and that's fine. Like we're living this like wild life on a planet like spinning through space and all that stuff. Like there's a lot that's out of our control, and I don't think aiming for something that's completely solid all the time in every situation is realistic. And that's just a way to set yourself up to feel like you're failing too. Like that's what I feel like the problem with that is like, oh, if I'm not really, really sure of myself all the time, I'm just like a failure. I'm just not, I'm never going to be confident. And I just really, I hope that people don't have that experience of feeling like they're not doing it right if they don't have it all the time. So yeah, I think the self-belief thing is a long-term, project. And yeah, I definitely, it's really evolved for me a lot over the years. Like I used to really identify as a shy, awkward introvert or something along those lines. And I don't identify in that way anymore. And I don't think there's anything wrong with people who do identify as shy. Like if that is how you feel and you are embracing who you are and owning it, like that's absolutely fine. But for me, I was finding that was actually, it just wasn't true anymore. And I kept saying it, and it was almost like I was pulling myself back to somewhere that I'd actually outgrown. And so I've kind of changed my view on that, as we all do over time. And so, but yes, I've had a long history of not being confident in many ways. And I've had a lot of help to get to this point too, like hypnotherapy, coaching, NLP, I've had a lot of help. And now the course that I'm doing is run by Sass Petherick. I don't know if you know her work.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm literally training to be a self-belief coach.
Wonderful.
Which
yeah.
feels like, where I've been aiming towards all this time. Like when that course came out, I was like, oh my gosh, I think this is the third round that she's done it. I think the first one, when she ran it, I was already on my other coach training course, so I couldn't do it. But I knew, like, when the moment is right, I'm going to be doing that course, because I'm already working with clients on very similar, topics. Self-doubt is something that comes up a lot, particularly with creative business owners, who tend to, most of my clients are. And so, yeah, that felt like sort of destiny. Like I'm supposed to be doing this course, because it's been my experience that lacking self-belief and self-trust and self-confidence has had such an impact on my life. Like I'm thinking of kind of my school years and university. I had sort of cripplingly low self-esteem, and I would not let myself do all sorts of things that I would have liked to do. And not only that, but I sort of ruined my own experience of things that I was doing, if that makes sense, just a constant kind of self-berating and feeling like I was messing things up as I was doing them, even though actually I was probably doing fine. And that's what hypnotherapy really helped me with. That was a real, like, sort of tipping point for me. Like one of the main things that I learned from that hypnotherapist was, like, I just wasn't giving myself enough credit for what I was already doing. And I had such a really mean kind of inner critic voice. And so yeah, all that to say, I've kind of like been
come
through
a long way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why I feel so kind of passionate about helping other people, experience that too, because I look back at my sort of 19-year-old self and think, gosh, you were actually doing fine and you were really being so mean to yourself. And I've still come a long way, in things that I would put myself forward for, and opportunities that I would go for that I wouldn't back then. So I have definitely become more confident, but I've also become nicer to myself, whether I'm being confident or not, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that compassion is, I think, so key in recognizing kind of who you are, where you want to get to, and the journey that you'll take to get there. And allowing yourself to change. And going back to that unshakable thing is actually not something that I've seen so much, but so goes the kind of bubbles that we live in on social media or whatever. But
you'll probably see it now that I've mentioned it. You'll see it like 3 times when you get off this call.
The red car thing. Oh, there's another one, but I think that kind of speak is so ingrained in patriarchal construct and the way our society lives. And it's that, as you say, that kind of it's like standing strong. And I imagine somebody kind of with a staff, I think they call those big sticks, I am unshakable, and like, but nothing can touch me. And then actually allowing things to touch you is what helps you grow and develop and softens you, and allows you to experience. And so much of the time when we don't allow ourselves to experience things, it's very detrimental to like, say, health and the person that you are, and to those around you, actually.
say I really agree with that. And I think that's been a big part of my learning as well on the confidence kind of journey, is that you cannot read your way to confidence. Like I tried that. I tried reading every single self-help book. And yes, they helped me. Like I learned a lot from books, and I felt like, oh, okay, this is like showing me a new way that I didn't know was possible. Because up until that point, and this is all like post going self-employed as well, I think I was very sheltered when I worked in a job. I just didn't know that any of this like personal development work, existed. And I think it's quite easy when you are in that type of role. Like for me, it felt like I would have just sort of trudged on for years in the same, and I was miserable, like really extremely miserable. That's why I ultimately left.
Surrounded by other questionably miserable people also,
exactly. And that's why you don't sort of question it, because you think, oh, well, this is just life, isn't it? Like I remember having that thought, like, oh, well, this is just adulthood then. Like, it's crap, isn't it? Like, well, why didn't no one warn me? Like, what is this? What I went to uni for? Like, spent like tens of thousands of pounds on a degree, and 4 years of my life, and this is it. I was like, this is not. There's been some false advertising about adulthood. But yeah, I would have carried on, and then going self-employed sort of thrust me into this world of personal development, which was great. Like, I think I remember I used to. There wouldn't be a time when I didn't have a podcast on that was about, self-coaching and all this kind of stuff and psychology and everything, and read all the books. And that did get me to a point, but ultimately you have to try things that scare you. And I know that's a really hard, like, truth that none of us really want to hear, because it'd be great if we could just read a book and then be more confident. Yeah, exactly. Just this magic transformation. But yeah, I think again, like from hypnotherapy, that was one of the lessons, was like allowing yourself to take small risks and then receive the evidence that you can handle that situation. So for me, like an example would have been, I think I mentioned identifying as a very awkward person. Like I had to go to in-person networking events because I didn't know anyone. I left my job at a short notice, and I didn't have a network to speak of at all. And I wasn't even sure. I knew I was going to do photography, but I didn't know back then that I was going to niche into just like branding photography that I do now. I did like a little bit of event stuff and product photography and things like that, but I had no clients and nowhere to find any, so I had to go to all these networking events, and I was terrified. Like I just was like, I'm gonna mess this up, like I'm not gonna know what to say, people are gonna think I'm weird. Like I felt like really young as well, because I guess I was 25 at the time, and most people at these events I was going to seemed to me to be sort of like 40 plus, and I was like, oh, they must think I'm like a child, like why am I even here, like all these judgmental kind of thoughts. And but actually the more I went, the more I realized that most of that stuff wasn't true. Like I did have a contribution to make. I made good friends there. I made I booked clients quite quickly off those things, which means I can't have been making such a bad impression, because why would anyone hire me? And then some of those people became repeat clients, or they referred people to me. And so I was seeing all this evidence. Actually, I was doing a fine job, and yet I was desperate to believe that I was like really messing it up. And so hypnotherapy helped me to reframe that and be like, actually, you're doing a really good job, and you're building a muscle every single time you do one of these things that's scary. You're getting a little bit better. And I'd refine my sort of elevator pitch that I'd have to say at the beginning, and like, well, it still kind of sends shivers down my spine, to be honest. I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore. But it was all a practice. And I think having that attitude of being like, I'm allowed to experiment, I'm allowed to practice, and also something that helped me a lot in those situations was just knowing that, like, if I am this sort of self-obsessed and like analyzing myself in the moment, imagine what everyone else there is doing. Like, we're all thinking about how we perceive and how we come across and whether we're making a good impression. And so that took some pressure off me too, to be like, they probably don't even notice that I like fluff my words, or remembered someone's name wrong, or whatever was happening, because they'd have been too worried about what they were kind of coming across like. So that was a real like permission for me to be like, take the pressure off. Like, you don't need to be this like perfect human, like you can just show up and be yourself a little bit more. And so I started to do that bit by bit, and embrace who I actually was, rather than trying to be someone different. And that really helped me.
There's an element of jumping in at the deep end with kind of your journey into self-employment. I had an extremely similar journey. But it's this kind of like feeling of, my coach Ruth Poundwhite actually has a saying of, I can't not do this. And like, it's that just deep knowing that you can't not do the thing you really want to do, or you're thinking about doing. also this kind of idea of the deep end, I can relate that again to perhaps people's journey into chronic illness. I don't know if I can call it a journey into chronic illness, but experience with either receiving a diagnosis or waiting a long time for a diagnosis. The symptoms are there whether you like it or not, and a lot of the people that I speak to, I did it myself. You try to read your way out of the situation, and there comes a point where you kind of are reading so much there's actually even no time to action anything you're reading. And I think it is all a process of like getting yourself ready to take the action, to take the steps.
Yeah, that's true. You're laying a foundation, aren't you, and kind of getting your brain prepared to believe something different, I think, and then you have to go and try it in the real world.
Absolutely. But this like idea that you're allowed to experiment and get things wrong, and if it goes wrong, actually in the grand scheme of things, weighing up what that's going to look like and how big of an impact that's actually going to have. And so often it's a very small impact, especially if you do take it in small steps, as you've talked about. And building that evidence bank that okay, I can do this. And I think drawing on my experience with my health, that is like a big evidence bank for me, that I can do hard things and I can do things in a self-led way with a lot of support, which is something that I've actually been working on, because I can be over independent. Like I try and do things on my own, too much to my detriment. And just building that muscle, as you say, and knowing that you can do it, and that actually perhaps a label, again going back to the shy thing, a label that you might have put on yourself in the past isn't quite true now.
I think there's a lot in that. I do think that we kind of, I relate this to my kind of discovery of like introvert extrovert thing. Like I think I reached a point, because mostly that experience was just like a huge relief to me, because I did that test I think in my second year of uni, and bearing in mind I'm like the most introverted you can get, like that's my now know. When I first went to uni, I moved into a flat of 10 of us, like with 9 strangers, and to think of that now, I'm like, that is an absolute nightmare. But I didn't have I didn't have a choice anyway, really, because that's just how the system was. You just got put in somewhere. But if I had have known, I guess maybe it wouldn't have been, it wouldn't have made much difference, but at least I would have known to be kinder to myself, because I just thought I am broken. Like there's something so wrong with me that I'm finding this whole thing absolutely draining and so exhausting. But no wonder, like not only have I got to be on and friendly and make a good impression to 9 people all the time, because they live there all the time. Like you can lock yourself in your dorm room to some extent, but like mostly you've got to kind of get involved, and then going out all the time and like drinking a lot. And like there were so many things I was doing to my body that were like not setting me up to be well. Do you know what I mean? Like just being hungover all the time, basically. Like you're already on the back foot there, because like it's just, for me, that's a time that would trigger me to be very mean to myself. And so I was just like, it was just like a recipe for disaster, basically. But anyway, my point is, when I went into second year, I did that test and I was like, oh my God, this is actually, it was just a revelation. Like I was like, I'm not the only one in the world, one thing that feels this way, but also like it's all it is that I'm drained by one thing and I'm filled up by something else. And for me, that something else is being alone, being in silence, lying under a blanket, which is what I do when I get in from photo shoots, incidentally, because I've kind of given so much, I then need to like recoup. And that's also why this reminds me of a way that I kind of did a practice run of structuring my year, how I did. I also really reduced the amount of shoots I did in a month. So I used to think, I need to just be shooting all the time, like fully booked, as people say. It must be like every day. And that's absolutely, it's just not sustainable in any way. So I started just shooting once a week, and that even for me felt like super bold, like, oh my God, how dare I only shoot once a month? But it worked out great. Like that's actually capacity for me. Like I can do that, I can give my all, because also it's more than a day a week, because as I mentioned, I travel a lot, so I might be staying over somewhere. So 2 days of a week out in the world, and then 3 days in editing and kind of resting and recuperating. Now I've made myself lose my train of thought, but yeah, I think I was talking about introvert, extrovert, wasn't I? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So it's generally speaking, I would say it's supportive, like knowing that about yourself is helpful, but it's when it kind of tips over into being a bit of a crutch that it can be a problem. Like I think I did that to a point, like
Okay.
using it as an excuse to not go to things. And
Yes.
you know, and because also I feel like I know myself well enough now to know that I do actually really value connection, and like some of the most kind of nourishing times in my life recently have been spending time with other self-employed people. And I've got some friends in Bristol that I'm very lucky to be able to spend time with, and we all have a lot in common and we can kind of support each other and cheer each other on. And so I could, in my kind of introvert brain, I could be like, oh, well, you don't want to go to that because you're an introvert, like that's going to drain you. And actually what I know to be true is that that will fill me up in a different way, like spending time with people that get me. So it's a fine line, I think. Like, yes, use it to empower you and know that like you're not alone and it's okay to feel how you do. But don't, you know, let yourself use it as an excuse if you're actually missing out on something that you also need, like that connection.
I relate to that so much. And I can't believe how much I relate to that, because it's especially, I think in my experience, using my chronic illness as a crutch comes in when I don't drink. So, you know, the hangover's not there, but if I am not doing things to help myself be well, and then I start on this kind of slope of, it's like a cloud that kind of comes in, and then I feel myself, I kind of, again, I know myself well enough to check when it's coming in and go, okay, that's not actually my thought or my want. That's a kind of a reaction to my very present, how I'm feeling. But actually, that's not how I'm feeling at the moment. That's due to, it's weird. You have to kind of have these internal conversations with yourself and like, is this me or is this? You know, and is this true or is this not? And and remembering that actually, because also you might relate to this, when you perhaps have been in a place where you're going against your introverted nature, or when I'm in a place where I'm going against my chronic illness so much, I have to, my chronic illness does become a crutch, because I have to stop doing the things I want to be doing. I have to make excuses and not turn up to things or cancel plans because my chronic illness is flaring. You know, in introversion, that might look like, because you literally cannot do anything than get out from under your blanket. And yet, in the right kind of, for you, you know, in the right vessel, it can be so empowering. And as you say, you know how you need to structure your life around your shoots and booking in time for that. And then again, it's the language that we use with ourselves. It's the talk we, you know, our self-talk. And rather than being like, oh my God, I'm broken, I have done something that other people can do and now I have to lay under a blanket. It's like, hey, no, I am this person and I am choosing to lay under a blanket, because I know that after I've done that for a couple of hours or for the evening, tomorrow I'm going to be like great and well and fine again, you know? And feel good about myself. And and not just choosing how, you know, being in a place, I suppose, where we can choose how to speak to ourselves after having, you know, done work on that, and being more present in life and not trying to keep up with this crazy pace.
Yeah, exactly. I really think that's exactly my experience of like initially I did feel like I had a lot of kind of shame or like comparison as well around, you know, just not feeling like I was able to do as much as I perceived other people to be doing. Again, we don't know all the facts, so maybe they're not shooting that much, but, and even, I mean, I feel so, I just know it's so right for me. Like when I see other people talking about like, got 5 shoots this week, whatever, maybe not even 5. I feel like no one can do 5. I mean, maybe if they're really short. Anyway,
I don't know how, but
but and if I do come across anyone talking about doing a lot, you know, there may even still be like a little pang of like, oh, like I should be able to do that too then. But you know, in the majority of cases, the voice in my head is very much like, good for you, like that's not the life for me. And so I just, it feels so right for me to do that, but it has taken a long time to kind of undo the conditioning that says like, in order to be valuable humans, we have to be like in output mode all the time, like creating and giving and producing things. And actually, like, yeah, I'm kind of unlearning that as well. But yeah, I think you have to, I think something I want to share in terms of the kind of self-compassion topic that's come up in our conversation, something that held me back a lot with that for a long time was feeling like I was just doing it wrong. Like I felt like there was some secret to it that I was missing and I didn't understand. And actually recently, so I bought this book, I think it came out in the summer, which is called Fierce Self-Compassion by Dr. Kristin Neff. And I also attended a workshop that she did online, kind of launching the book. And it was so interesting. Like basically the lesson I took from it was like, it actually is as simple as it sounds. Like being kind to yourself is that simple, and that doesn't mean that it's easy. Like it's a practice and it's a muscle. But I think for me, I was just feeling so bad that I was like, she talks about this too, how it's kind of ironic that the act of trying to be self-compassionate can trigger so much self kind of berating. It's like, I'm doing it wrong, I'm not being kind enough to myself. And that was me for a long time. And now I'm like, you're doing fine. Like you've just learned this thing and you're practicing it, and you're not going to get it perfect every time, and that's okay. And that in itself is a really self-compassionate act. And I think that's a freeing thing to know, is like, you're not doing it wrong if you can't do it right every single time. But also, like, there's no secret, like you're not missing a secret. Like it is as simple as it sounds. And yet it takes time and practice and gentleness. And so that's been really like revelatory for me this year. Like, oh, actually I wasn't missing a trick. Like there isn't some like memo that I missed. So that's been really helpful as well, just knowing like it's a muscle, and I'm gonna, use it as much as I can and be nice to myself when I don't quite get it right.
And having it, in my experience, when that happens, I have this like to and fro conversation in my head, because the knee-jerk berating will come in, and then I'll go, hey, what you doing?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm great, don't be so mean to me, or whatever. I'm like, I love you, and I feel like Homer Simpson, when he's having conversations like chocolate or whatever. Something that came up for me when you were just saying that was I have realized how much going back to the seasons, I think, can affect how I suppose operate in Instagram particularly, but places that are kind of very busy, and very busy with so much information and thoughts and people and all of that kind of thing. And I came off Instagram at the end of last year and ended up staying off for like 6 months, came back on in the summer, loved it, and then and decided to use it in a very, I don't know, non-script way, and now I've started to really dislike it again. And what I think I'm noticing is that the voice of, say, comparison, and of not feeling so much, not feeling that really strong sense of self, and that I'm quite used to, a lot of self-doubt comes in, and what I think I'm coming to the terms with the fact that actually I may just use Instagram for like 6 months of the year, in the summer, when I feel much more resilient and stronger in myself. And I'm not kind of saying, because it makes me question myself. I think that's the thing, and it makes me question what I'm doing, and oh, have I got that wrong? Am I meant to be doing this a certain way? And like, have I missed the memo on this thing? And getting so confused over I think what I know about myself, and what and the way I want to live. And I'm not quite sure where I was going with this, but I think it just it came up when as you were talking, really, about how things evolve and change, and being open and kind to ourselves and allowing that to happen.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Could be the kindness thing. Like I would consider exactly what we're speaking about there, like me with the way I stretch my year, and you talking about using Instagram in that way. That is ultimately a very kind act. It's like allowing yourself to experiment with something that isn't the convention, and just being, oh no, sorry, my dog is barking because there's someone at the door.
Oh,
we're basically creating the conditions for ourselves to try something different, because the world and sort of society at large would not have us do that. Like, it would work very well for the status quo, for us to just like stay in line and just do everything how we perceive it's being done by the majority of people. So it does take courage and kind of boldness to go against that. And so the way that you create the conditions for that is to be really loving and kind to yourself, because that's what you need in that moment, right? If you're taking a kind of risk and trying to do something different, what you really need is like a friend to be with you and like holding your hand through it. And that's why I love your like image of having a conversation with yourself, because that's my experience too of the kindness thing. Is like, there's the default knee jerk, like, what are you doing? Like, no one else is doing this, you're not allowed. And then there's like, hang on, like, what if I am allowed? Like, you can, it's just much more open. And it's something I talk about a lot, is kind of curiosity, like bringing curiosity to things. So when you do have a thought that pops up that feels very rooted in kind of societal conditioning, like, for example, we're all supposed to work 9 to 5, and if we don't, we're lazy. We get curious about that, like, who says who, like, literally who says, like, who made up that rule, and why is it still a rule? Because as far as I've read, that was introduced in the 1800s, and like times have moved on, and yet here we are still thinking that that's the norm, and that that's okay for humans to do. And even though there's been so much research about how that's not, in terms of concentration levels and attention spans and everything, like, none of us are able to, well, not able, but like, well, I personally am not able to work 8 full hours a day at a good level. Like, I could sit here and, produce a load of rubbish, but good quality work is not going to come out in that time. And so you have to question the status quo and be like, why is it like that? And does it work for me? Because often the answer is no. And so, being really kind to yourself and keeping that open mind and having those conversations with yourself as you go through that process of trying to subvert the kind of convention is really important.
And I think what can help us with that curiosity and questioning is something that can. I went away a couple of weekends ago, and it was such a kind of an opportunity to refresh and take a step back and question things, and notice things. And I think when we're on this kind of hamster wheel of how society would have us live, and we don't have time to question it. And it's, again, going back to that balloon kind of analogy, having the opportunity, and when you're surrounded by people who are all feeling the same. And I think self-employment actually has been great. Just the very idea that, and I know that this is actually an idea that perhaps a lot of people move away from it, on their self-employment journey of time is money. It's certainly something, an idea that I've moved away from. But I think you do very much analyze the hours you put in to a day and realize that, hey, 8 hours is just, as you say, I don't sit here and work at a top level for 8 hours a day. Absolutely not. And the only way you question that is when it's really, the buck stops at you, I think. Whereas when you're in a bigger machine, you don't question it. And that kind of translates, outside of the self-employment world. And giving yourself the chance, I think, to step outside of some of these machines, because who says this works? And it's like the people that it benefits, right?
Well, exactly. That's it, isn't it? I really relate to that as well. I think there's kind of 2 points, aren't there? Like, one of them being, like, if you are in that kind of, like, let's say like a corporate job or something like that, and you are literally surrounded by other people who are not questioning it, it's really important in that context to take yourself out of it if you can, to get a bit of perspective, and then assess whether that's working for you. But also in this context of, even if you already are kind of designing your life how you want it to be, that time away, and like you kind of hinted at, like, being, I think, taking yourself out of your routine and into a different place. Like, even with this what we're having this conversation about now, about the way I structure my year, I think probably the first time that sort of popped into my head as even a possibility was on a coaching retreat, because I was in a different country, or like a different part of this country at least, and I was in somewhere different, surrounded by people who were also questioning things and coming up with their own solutions and ways to design their own lives. That gave me permission to do it as well. So I think it's easy, if you're kind of in the same place all the time, to not, like, break out of your routine, but if you are
Yeah.
taken out of your normal context and put somewhere different, you can shift your mindset quite a lot. And I think that's also the magic of coaching. I think if you work with someone, that will help you even without moving your body physically somewhere different, can help open your mind to new things and like basically introduce you to new perspectives that actually come from you. I'm not saying that, you know, I would suggest things to someone as a new perspective, but helping people find their own new perspectives that they just haven't quite like accepted are there. So I think that's a really cool thing about coaching, like just giving people that opportunity to like, oh, actually there's something else that could be possible for me that I haven't really thought about or faced up to yet. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, I love that. It's like a little brain break, isn't it? It's like this kind of, and it's also that time to like focus on yourself for an hour or, you know, an hour and a half, whatever it may be. And, you know, that accountability also, you know, you're with someone else. I love this idea that, you know, we can, well, and maybe actually this is what has become so hard in the past couple of years, is that these opportunities to get away, you know, and it doesn't have to be a new physical location, even a walk in a different location can help you. Or I often find I walk around my village and I found myself going on the same direction. And one day I was like, oh, I'll just swap it around and I'll start at the end. And I was like, oh my goodness, I see all this new stuff. And then it changes the way I'm thinking. And it's like, oh, just something as simple as that. But, you know, during, I suppose, the pandemic, it's our opportunities to get away have been reduced, whether that's kind of physically or metaphorically get away, you know, it's it has been reduced. And I suppose I'd love to know, like, what do you do apart from, say, your retreats and stuff? How do you kind of take a break and get away?
Well, I would love a holiday right now. It's been so long since I've been abroad, and I'm just like, oh, I was reading a book recently and they were describing like having the sun on their face in the south of France and like the smell of lavender and baguettes. And I was just like, oh my God, I cannot wait to have that again. Like, I just feel so, I've been craving it so much. And also I'm very like, I feel very at home in like Mallorca and like that, like Spain as well. Like I said, did languages at uni, and my mum's got like Italian sort of heritage, and I feel like I'm meant to live like in the Mediterranean. I mean, Bristol's fine too, but like I love, like, I feel like I get so like nourished, like my soul is absolutely like filled up by going to places like that. So I feel like it almost should be like a business expense for me. Like I need like at least a week a year in Mallorca to like help my creative juices flow. But so definitely travel when I'm allowed to. But I love what you said about like doing a walk backwards. Like, it sounds so simple, but it's amazing, isn't it, what you see? And I feel like I've been, because we moved into this house a year ago and we still don't really know. I mean, we have like our regular dog walks that we do, but there's lots of roads that we've like not come across, or and it's amazing what you notice. Like, you'll kind of look up and there's like, I don't know, just the tops of buildings that you've like never seen, and it just shows how much we operate on a subconscious kind of level most of the time, and things, we just absorb our surroundings without really fully analyzing them. Like we just accept what we see. Definitely walks, and like I said, like being around people that kind of get me, like those self-employed friends. Like we actually did, which I really recommend, a couple of weekends ago, we did our own like DIY retreat. So we just went to an Airbnb, like not even, I think it was about 2 hours drive away in Dorset. It was quite cheap, like didn't cost loads for us to all go, so obviously we were sharing this big house, and just went to like Lidl and bought loads of food. Like you can do it like fairly cheaply. And it was amazing, like just having time, like you said, dedicated time where it's like full permission to just like focus on us and speak about whatever we're going through, and dreaming for next year as well, because it was obviously like, it was December when we did this, so it's kind of like a really nice time of year to go away and kind of plan for next year. But knowing that we were all kind of in a similar boat, like we've all got very different businesses and different kind of, we're at different stages with them and stuff like that, but we're like on a level, like with our kind of, you know, frame of mind and all that kind of thing. And it was just really cool to have a dedicated weekend to just like think about all those things. So that helped me a lot as well. And again, like as I'm moving into like trying to decide how my business is going to look for the next few years, it's really important to have that time, so that I think it stops you from just going into the year and like waiting to see what happens. Like, I mean, I think that has its place too,
Yes.
in small doses, I guess. But I think being intentional and having like a bit of an idea of how you'd like it to be and how you'd like to feel in it is really important. So that's how we kind of sort of use that opportunity to set some intentions for next year and dream about what it could look like. So yeah, that's a way that and like I said, it's a fine line, because as an introvert I could be like, oh god, a weekend with 5 people, like I'm going to be exhausted. And I was exhausted, but it was totally worth it, because it gave me all these other things and filled up my cup in all these other like values that I really like look for. So yeah, that's a really cool thing to do as well. We're going to have to make it an annual tradition, I think.
Yeah, that sounds so nice. And again, you know, yeah, you were exhausted, but you knew that was going to be the case. And so, you know, perhaps planned for that. I think I saw someone recently, you know, they had their booster jab and they knew, they were like, do you know what, I'm just going to have 2 days of a duvet day, or, you know, just really not doing much, because I anticipate that this is going to knock me out, you know. And how thankful you are for that time afterwards, but also for doing the thing, going on this retreat, you know, filling up your cup and surrounding yourself with people who get you. I think that is so so key, because so often we can try to convince the haters. That's a strong term, but
I know what you mean.
It's trying to like prove ourselves to people who are just never going to get it anyway. And so, you know, making sure you kind of build your community of people who get you. And I really want to do something, you know, next year. One of my kind of things that I want to create and is, you know, the opportunity for people with chronic illness, but who see it in a way. This is I'm putting this out there.
Yeah, accountability.
I will hold myself accountable to this, but you know, but who see chronic illness in, not in this way that it's here, you know, that it's something here to completely ruin their lives, but actually, how can I tap into it as you know, my superpower? How can I use it to guide me and help me, and as my ally, you know? And I think having conversations, just free, open, exploratory, curious conversations about these ideas. And also I loved what you said about, you know, because how often do we look at times ahead and say, right, this is what I need to get done, I'll just put that in, and that's how I'll live my life. But actually, how lovely is it to approach it with, how do I want to feel within that? How can I bring more of that in? How can I, you know, support myself? And then I will put in the things I need to do, you know, and do those in that way that will help me. You know, just because you have to do one thing doesn't mean you have to do it in a certain way.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like that also, it's helpful to look at it from that way of like, how do I want to feel in this? Because it stops you from falling into the trap of, I'll be happy when I have a house, or when I only work the summer months in photography, or, you know, whatever barrier you're going to set for yourself, or well, not, it shouldn't be a barrier. It's like something to aim for, but it then feels like a barrier because you're like, well, I can't have it. Like I can't be happy until that's happened. And so actually flipping that on its head and being like, I want to feel next year in my business spacious and held and connected and alive, or whatever those feelings and values might be for you. And being like, okay, well, what would that look like if I built the business on that? What would it be like? And that's something that I never would have done before. Like, in fact, when I first went self-employed, Jen Carrington, that I mentioned before, I had a one-off session with her, and she was the first person to like ask me that question of like, what would your ideal week look like, and, you know, how do you want to feel? And I was like, what what is this? What are you asking me? Like, surely I'll just work 9 to 5 and I'll just shoot every day, and then I'll like be really tired on the weekends. Like that, you know, I thought that was just the template. And she kind of gave me permission to think like, you don't have to do it that way, that you could do it any way you want, basically. And so, yeah, I think that thinking of it in that way is more supportive, because it means you're not kind of stopping yourself from getting the thing, or putting off your happiness and kind of satisfaction and fulfillment and joy until you have reached a certain point, because you also need to enjoy the process. Like, everything is a process, isn't it? And so if you're only aiming for one thing and that's like your threshold that you have to meet before you can enjoy it, that might be a while. So I think anything you can do to enjoy the journey and be really kind to yourself along the way is worthwhile.
Yeah, because those feelings, the way you want to feel, don't have to wait for that. They can happen now.
Yeah, exactly.
Or they can start to happen now. You know, you can do something and take that first kind of miniature tiny step.
That's it. Yeah, because it can be tiny things. Like I think that's the thing as well with, if you are looking to kind of structure your year in a different way or your work week in a different way, start with the tiniest things. So if one of the things was that you wanted to feel, I'm trying to think of what the value would be. Like I'm thinking of like going and having coffee on your own. Like I remember doing this actually maybe like 3 years ago in the summer, like going to a cafe and sitting outside in the sun and having a cup of tea and just people watching for a bit. And like that gave me so much, just being able to watch people, and it gave me ideas, and I felt like really kind of like lifted and inspired. But it was a tiny thing, and it was like, it felt quite audacious at the time to like go on 3 o'clock on like a Wednesday or whatever. It's like, oh, I should be at my desk, but I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm like in a cafe. But things like that is a way that you can give yourself a little piece of the feeling that you want without, you know, saying I'm only going to work 1 day a week or whatever your ultimate goal might be. So yeah, I think that's a helpful way to approach it too, is like, what's the tiniest version of this feeling that I want that I could give myself? How could I give myself a taste of it? And then you can expand, because then once you've had the feeling of that as well, like I said, you know, I felt almost like a bit rebellious and like, I don't know, it gave me like a nice boost, that then kind of spurs me on to like, okay, well, I could do with this feeling a little bit more, and how can I really like it? Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think it's about experimenting, isn't it, and seeing like, what could I do to give myself a taste of this feeling, and then like, how can I take it further?
Oh, I love that so much. As you said, this time was going to go so quickly, and it has. It's been so wonderful to speak to you, Sophie. Thank you. And where can people find you, find out more about you, connect with you?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I honestly could just keep chatting forever. It's so interesting. So yeah, my website is sophiecareful.co.uk, and that is like the word careful, but with a double L. People never believe that's my real name, but it is.
I love it.
And so on Instagram, my coaching one is sophiecareful_coaching, and then my photography is just Sophie Careful, and they're both kind of linked together. I think if you click on one, you should find the other. My photography one is quite neglected recently. I use the coaching one a little bit more at the moment. But yeah, you can find me on both of those.
Amazing. Thank you. And I hope you enjoy more of these walks and get to plan your lovely bone warming holiday. I refer to that as having my bones warmed. I love it. I'm the same.
That's exactly it.
Yeah, I'm meant to be there under the sun all the time.
Yeah, it's such a good place to be, isn't it? Yeah, I really am excited for that. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been really, really cool to chat to you, and yeah, look forward to listening back as well. Actually, do I? Maybe not. It's always listening to your own voice, isn't it? But
it is. But it's a process that I'm coming to really like, not listen to my own voice, but listen to the conversations back. I'm loving it. I spend my Mondays editing, re-listening, you know, writing all the blurb, and it's my favorite day of the week now.
Oh, cool. Well, yeah, you've had some great guests on it. It's been really great listening to it. So yeah, I'm very honoured to be one of your episodes. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. Thank you, and take care.
You too. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.